Hello, welcome back. Today it's all about game mechanics. We're going to be dealing with magic. For those of you who want some assistance or some explanation of Dungeons and Dragons 5e magic, that's why we're here. You can see some maps, miniatures and dice. That means I will be doing some demonstration near the end. I have a slideshow presentation for today, and I'll be putting up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. I see that Fred Hubber is in the chat already. Welcome and glad to have you here. Fred Hubber's a patron. Patrons ensure that this program continues by supporting me so that I can keep running these sorts of programs, whether it's to cover Dungeons and Dragons 5e or to cover a different game system. Okay, that's what we're trying to do here, is try to cover different systems. But yes, I'm doing this just before I go on holiday. I have one more day and then it's holiday time, or today is my last day before I go on holiday. Okay, so grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable. Feel free to take part in that poll, and I will do my slideshow presentation first, and then that'll cover all the mechanics of magic first, and then we'll go into the demonstration aspect. And feel free to ask some questions. Put them into the chat now is probably a good idea rather than doing them later on. And yeah, we'll go from there. Anyway, let's get started. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today my name is, well, welcome to something. It's quite clear I'm tired. It's near the end of my brain span. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today it's all about Dungeons and Dragons 5e. And the magic mechanics of the game. So this is lesson plan 5. This is lesson 5. 4. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have a lot of trouble today. Just bear with me, people. Bear with me. We'll get there. Anyway, what are we covering today? We're covering spell level, cantrips, rituals, casting time for a spell, spell components, spell duration, concentration, schools of magic, spell area effect, and casting spells. The process of doing that. So that's what I'm covering in the overview for today as part of this presentation. The objectives is to explain everything to you, to demonstrate where possible, which I do intend to do, so I'm set up to do that today. Allowing you a practice playthrough is just not possible at this present time, but I can at least answer your questions, and that will hopefully rectify some of the issues that you might have at your table if you're playing this game and you're still feeling new, or maybe you're experienced, I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, let's start off with the beginning. Let's start at the beginning, which is spell level. So the basics and concepts of Dungeons and Dragons 5e magic is all about Vancine magic, and so it's all broken up into different aspects. But the first thing we need to talk about is spell level. Spell level indicates the power of the magic being cast or created, and how difficult it is to actually cast or create in the first place. So spell will actually range from 0 to 9. So a 0 level spell is very, very basic. It's very primitive. It's very weak. A 9th level spell is one of the strongest spells in the game. A character level does not correspond to your spell level. So if you are casting a level 1 spell, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're level 1. If you are casting a level 3 spell, it doesn't necessarily mean that your character is level 3. Okay, so a level 3 spell doesn't mean you're level 3. So the spell level does not correspond to the character level. That's a different thing. Now, the first one I talked about was a 0 level spell. Now, a 0 level spell is your very basic spell that you can use pretty much as you like. And it's infinite in its use. So it's called a cantrip. It's called a 0 level spell. Cantrips can be cast, as I said, an infinite number of times without having to use up a spell slot, because they don't use spell slots in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. You don't have to prepare a cantrip or a 0 level spell as a spellcaster. Okay? Why? Because the spellcaster have actually memorized it. They've actually practiced the spell so many times they don't forget it. It's stuck in their memory. It will not go anywhere else. So you can use it as many times as you like. There's another type of spell which not everybody gets to use, and that is the ritual spell. And you can only cast a ritual spell if it has a tag. So some spells, but not all spells that you cast, have the ritual tag associated with them. which means when you cast it as a ritual, there's some benefits. First of all, a ritual version of the spell takes 10 minutes longer to cast than normal. So if it takes a casting time of 1 action, it will take 10 minutes plus 6 seconds, or or 1 action, basically about 10 minutes if it's a first level spell, okay? And it adjusts from there. So basically you're taking about 10 minutes roughly for casting the ritual version. And now the other aspect of it is that rituals, when you cast a ritual spell as a ritual and take that 10 minutes plus the spell's normal casting time, you don't use up a spell slot. So you don't have to worry about expending that limited resource. So it's always beneficial, if you can, to cast a ritual spell as a ritual rather than just as a normal spell. The ritual version of a spell can't be cast at higher levels, so you can't upcast with a ritual. You can only cast it at the minimum level for that spell. That's it. The other thing is, a spellcaster might have a feature that grants them the ability to cast a spell as a ritual. You know, if you don't have that, if you're a spellcaster, and a wizard does have this, and so does a cleric, if you don't have the ritual caster feature, you can't cast that spell as a ritual. But there is a feat you can pick up that allows you to do so. The caster must also have the spell prepared on their list of spells known. Not always the case. Sometimes that doesn't apply. There are special circumstances, but usually the expectation is if you want to cast that spell as a ritual and you've got the ritual caster feature, then you have to prepare the spell as well. So your known spells will be larger than the prepared spells that you have. Okay, so that's how a ritual spell works. Now we have our casting time. Casting time, you're going to be using this quite a lot. It's very important. So spell casting time categories. It's broken up into the following. Casting time can be, it's basically how long a spell takes to create it. And casting times are broken up to 4 categories. There's a casting time of an action, which is the most common one. There's also a bonus action casting time, which there is only a handful of spells that work this way. And then again, there's an even smaller number of spells that have a reaction as a casting time. In other words, you don't cast it on your turn. You will cast it as part of a trigger, probably on somebody else's turn. And then the last one is longer casting times than 6 seconds. That could be 1 minute. It could be an hour. It could be days. So there are longer casting times. These are usually not used in combat. They're usually used outside of combat. The combat ones are going to be your action, bonus action, and reaction spells. So that is your casting time. The next thing we need to deal with is our materials, our components, all the other things that go together into creating that magic. So components of a spell are broken up into the following things. There are the physical requirements by the spellcaster that they must meet in order to create the spell that they have selected. Not all spells have all of these requirements. They may only require some of them, or in some cases, none of them, but that's very rare too. The verbal component, or when you see V for verbal, is the chanting of mystical words to form the spell first. Then there's somatic, and this is when the spellcaster uses gestures to manipulate the magic into existence, and it requires at least 1 free hand to perform this type of magic, even if you're using some sort of materials. And lastly, we have the material component, which is usually designated as M, and that is the particular objects from your component pouch, or if you're using a spellcasting focus such as a wand, orb, or rod, this will assist in binding the magic into the physical world, and it requires at least 1 free hand to perform. Now you might be wondering, hang on, if I have the somatic component where I have to make these gestures and I've also got to hold something, does that mean I need to have 2 hands free to cast my magic? No. The same hand that performs the somatic gestures is also the same hand that holds the materials in your hand, okay? You only ever have to have 1 hand free, even if you have a somatic component or a material component. That's it. Okay, duration of our spell. How long our spell will last, essentially. Okay, so the duration of a spell. A spell's duration is the length of time the spell effect will persist over time. Whether it will be, in some cases, spell durations can be a few rounds, or maybe even just one round. It might be for a minute, or for hours, or for days, or even in some cases for years. Or the duration might be permanent, but we'll come to that. Instantaneous spells are where the magical effect exists only for an instant. Often this is a damage-dealing spell, but not always. Concentration spells require that the spellcaster focus their attention on the spell for the duration of the effect for it to exist. If they do not concentrate and do not put their attention on it, they will lose the spell. So they need to continue to concentrate for the spell to persist and be in effect. Okay. Being that the case, we need to talk about concentration. Probably one of the more difficult concepts to understand in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, in terms of magic that is, and that is concentration. The first thing is, a spellcaster can only have one active concentration spell at a time. Now, the reason for this is to stop people from stacking multiple buffing spells, because often a buffing spell is something that gives you an improvement to your character in some way, or to a creature or something like that, or even a debuff. They're often concentration spells. Fundamentally, they're also to sort of stop people from including fly and invisibility at the same time, because the combination of fly and invisibility are usually a winning card. There's really not much you can do to stop something like that. So 5e is designed to sort of curtail that, for very good reasons, because it's not a fun game once everything you do always succeeds. Okay, a Dungeon Master can require a DC 10, which is a difficulty class 10 Constitution saving throw, to maintain concentration if the environmental phenomena or effects around it would distract the spellcaster. So if you're casting a concentration spell and you're trying to maintain concentration on it, if the Dungeon Master or Game Master deems that there's some sort of environmental phenomena taking place that requires you to make a concentration spell, you will require to do so, and it's a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. It could be for any reason that they think deems worthy. Now, there's another time that you might need to make a concentration check, and that is if the spellcaster takes damage while concentrating on a spell. The magic user must make a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on the spell, or the spell will end. Okay, so we know our criteria, we know our conditions, wonderful. But there's one other thing we need to nail down. We already know that some concentration checks will require a DC 10 Constitution saving throw, but there is an exception to that, and that exception is when you take damage. And so let's go over how you figure this out. When a spell is a concentration spell and you're trying to maintain concentration on it, if that concentration check is required and it's because you're taking damage, this is what you want to try to do. Your concentration or your Constitution saving throw for concentration on the spell has a DC. That DC will always be 10 or half the damage you took from a single attack against the spellcaster trying to concentrate. So it's either DC 10 or half whatever damage you've taken when you were trying to concentrate on your spell. Whichever number is the highest is the one you take. So if I take 20 points of damage, then I cut that in half. That becomes 10. And of course the DC is 10, so they're both the same, so it's going to be a DC 10 for my concentration check to maintain concentration on my spell. But if I take 30 points of damage from a single blow, not combined from separate attacks, but from a single blow, then I am required to make a concentration check. And in this case, we take half of that 30 points of damage, and it's going to come to 15. 15 is greater than 10, so therefore, in this case, I'm going to find myself having to make a concentration check with a DC 15, not a DC 10. Okay, it's very, very simple. And for every single attack that causes damage to your spellcaster who's trying to concentrate on a spell, you will need to make another concentration check or another Constitution saving throw for every single attack that hits you and does damage. So don't get hit. Use cover. Okay, next. Schools of magic. What do they look like? Well, first off, there are 8 schools of magic. Magic is grouped into spell types, and the 8 categories describe the function of that school of magic. So for abjuration, this is spells that offer protection of some kind. For conjuration spells, this involves transporting objects or creatures from one place to another. For divination spells, this reveals information to the spellcaster of some kind. Enchantment spells affect the mind of other creatures around you, or possibly even your own mind. Evocation spells manipulate magical energy, and they allow you to destroy something or restore something. Okay? Illusion spells deceive the senses of creatures around you, so you can, of course, create illusions. Necromancy spells manipulate the energy of life and death. So necromancy allows you to heal or bring people back to life, or to kill. They do the same sort of thing, or to actually create undead also. Next, we have transmutation spells. They change the properties of a creature, an object, or the environment. So transmutation means transformation of some kind. We're changing their property, that we're changing their shape, we're changing their nature of some kind. That's what we're trying to do here. Now, when we're using our spells, there is a thing called the spell area of effect. The area that you will actually affect with your spell. And it's broken down to a couple of different things, and this is what it looks like. The areas of effect for a spell are determined by the space that magic changes, okay, that magically changes within it, and what creature might be affected by the magic that you're casting. So you have your line, which is just a single line from one point to another, okay? You have a cone, which is exactly what it sounds like an ice cream cone. Then you have a cube, which is basically a box. You have a sphere, which is basically a ball shape. And then you have a cylinder, which is basically the shape of what a toilet roll would be. So those are the sorts of shapes we're dealing with. That's how you manipulate your magic. It is possible to have something that looks a little bit different, where you can change the area effect. It's very rare that this occurs, though. It usually falls into those particular brackets. Line, cone, cube, sphere, and cylinder. Okay, now that we have our area covered, now area effect spells will often be affected by cover if the spell actually describes and states as such, but not always. Area effect spells do tend to fall into this bracket, though, that they can go around cover in some cases. Not always. Line effects usually are always affected by cover. Okay, casting a spell. How do we actually go about casting a spell? Now, I've kind of already gone over the mechanics of determining your spell casting to hit, and damage will always be different depending on the types of spell you're using, but there are different types of spell casting, and it's broken up basically into 5 categories. First off, we have the melee attack spell. This is made at close quarters with an attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class. This is something like Booming Blade, Shocking Grasp, where you actually electrify somebody. Booming Blade is where you have a blade, magical blade, that you can use to strike somebody up close. Inflict Wounds, where you're actually doing necrotic damage. Flaming Blade, which is again another blade just made out of flaming energy. And then spiritual weapons are a little odd because you can move the spiritual weapon around, so it's not from close quarters with your character, it's from wherever you're positioning your spiritual weapon. But they fall under melee attack spells. Okay, attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class. The next one is the ranged attack spell, and is made at close range or at long range depending on the spell. And it's going to be an attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class again. This is something like Eldritch Blast, where you shoot out like a purple ray. Ray of Frost, where you shoot out a white ray that actually freezes somebody. We have the Firebolt, which is basically a bolt of energy that is launched out and causes fire damage. And then we have Guiding Bolt and Chaos Bolt, each of which have their own specific effects. Next, we have the melee saving throw spell. A melee saving throw spell is performed at close quarters. You're using a saving throw targeting the enemy. Okay, the enemy has to actually make a saving throw of some kind, whatever that might be. And the only example I can think of in Dungeons & Dragons 5e is Bestow Curse. There really aren't that many melee saving throw spells out there. The most common, though, for a saving throw is the ranged saving throw spell. And these are made at short range or at long range, and you perform a saving throw targeting the enemy, and the enemy will make that saving throw. And in some cases, this would be Fireball, where you cover a large area, okay, a sphere, or sorry, it has a radius to it, but it's basically a sphere, and it explodes out from a point, and you're doing fire damage. And then anybody caught in that blast area is going to be having to make a dexterity saving throw. Lightning bolt is like a line. It's got a line effect, and this is also a dexterity saving throw, and it does electrical damage. You have Sacred Flame, which is magical flame energy, and it is launched up or dropped down from above. Toll the Dead is another example of a ranged saving throw spell. Now the last one is the automatic success spells. They don't require an attack roll, they don't require a saving throw, they don't require any dice roll whatsoever. They simply work no matter what. When you choose to use them, they do something. Prestidigitation is a good example of this. It has many different effects. It's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of Dungeons & Dragons 5e, or Dungeons & Dragons full stop, really. It does lots of different things. You can put out lights, you can make lights flicker on, you can change colour, you can clean things, you can do lots of little things. Okay. Mage Hand, which produces a spectral hand that you can use to manipulate your environment with a weight limit to it. Light, which creates light, obviously. Mending, which actually fixes something. As long as you've got all the pieces there and the break isn't too big, you can actually fix or mend that break. Message, which allows you to kind of communicate telepathically with somebody. Magic Missile, which is actually an attacking spell, but does not have an attack roll or a saving throw. It just does damage. And then Droidcraft, which has a lot of different effects. You can forecast the weather and things like that. Make a bud or a pod bloom or open up. So those are the different types of magic that you have available to you. And every time I run this program, I always like to give out some miscellaneous recommendations to people to make sure that they are familiar and feel comfortable with the idea of using magic in their game. So first off, miscellaneous recommendations. Okay, spellcasting is complex, even for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I know a lot of people assume and state that Dungeons & Dragons 5e is one of the simplest versions of Dungeons & Dragons. I can assure you, after playing a few more versions of D&D, I've now played basic BECME Dungeons & Dragons. I've played 3.5, 4e, 5e, Pathfinder 1st Ed Edition. I've never played Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Ed Edition or 2nd Ed Edition. Those are the only versions I haven't played. But I can assure you that 5e is not the simplest version. And Magic in 5e is not the simplest version either. I would say to you that it's all right to make mistakes. You're allowed to make mistakes because it's complicated. Known spells, prepared spells, and spell slots are not the same thing. So known spells are the spells that your character knows. These are the spells they could potentially cast. From those known spells, you have to prepare a number of spells from that list, which will not include every known spell that you have. It's a limited pool. The grouping is much smaller. And then your spell slots is usually even smaller again, based on what level you're dealing with. Are we dealing with a cantrip, which you can cast as many times as you like? Are we dealing with a level 1 spell? Well, there's going to be a certain amount of level 1 spells you can cast, a certain amount of level 2 spells you can cast going up. Depending on your level, your character level, you'll get more spell slots at different spell levels. Okay? So they're not the same sort of thing. So known spells, prepared spells, and spell slots. This makes the whole system very, very complicated because it's based on a Vancian magic system where when you learn magic, you forget it and then you have to relearn it to be able to cast it again. As I said, spell level is not equal to the character class level, okay? Just because you have a class level of 3 does not mean you can cast a spell level of 3. read the spells really carefully, okay? And then also jot down the page number for quick reference for yourself, because it's often very difficult to remember all the details about a spell, but also for the game master or dungeon master so they can reference those pages if they need to. One of the things that slows down Dungeons and Dragons combat is magic. Magic is probably the most time-consuming process unless you really know what you're doing and your game master is very familiar with all of the spells. And there are many, many spells. There's at least 150 spells in the player's handbook for 5e, and if we start looking at supplements, then the number of spells expands again. So there's a lot of spells to be able to try to learn. And even if you've been playing a long time, some of the more powerful spells or more complicated spells out there are not easy to adjudicate. Okay, so yeah, give yourself an easy time. Don't make it too hard on yourself. Don't make it too hard on your game master or dungeon master when they have to adjudicate the fact that you're using magic. Magic is complicated. I hope this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I want to thank my patrons who support me every week so that I can actually keep running this program. Without them, this program would not exist. And I will not be covering 5e for a while. I will come back to it. But today is certainly your opportunity to ask questions and give feedback if you want to do so. We'll be looking at a different system when I come back from my holidays. I want to thank you for watching and listening. All the best with your games. Go forth and cast magic. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Hello everybody, I'm back. Okay, we'll see how we go. I'm a little tired, but I'm going to do my very best to answer all of your questions in chat. Okay, and so I'm happy for you to ask those questions. If I have the answer to those questions, I will answer them. Helmer, I can see Helmer and Fred Hubber in here. Helmer, I can see you've got a few questions here. I am very, very happy to answer whatever questions you need answered. So feel free to fire away and I will do my best. And if I have to demonstrate it and I feel like just explaining it's going to be too difficult, I have the resources in front of me. I should be able to demonstrate what you need to know. Okay. All right. So again, thank you, Fred Hubber, for being here. He's a patron, supports this program so it keeps running. And yeah, I think when I come back from my holidays, we might do Morkbork, or we might do Back Me Dungeons and Dragons. That might be the thing. We'll see. Okay, Helmer. There's Helmer L. Paladin Verned. Well, I'm glad you were able to make it, Helmer. What do you got here? I am considering and assemble a spell system. It will be complex. Yes. So, in the past, older versions of Dungeons and Dragons, the creators of Dungeons and Dragons, they created their own spells. They let their players create spells. There was no magic formula. What they did is they would say, okay, do you want to create a new spell? What's it going to be called? What's it going to do? And then the game master would adjust it if they felt they needed to adjust it. And the player would simply tell them how it would work. This is something that Wizards of the Coast is playing around with, but they're trying to hardwire it in, and it's a disaster waiting to happen. But yeah, creating your own spells is certainly a thing. Absolutely, and I encourage people to allow players to actually create their own magic spells. It might do the same thing as another spell, but it might just have a different name and have slightly different effect. Okay, Helmer, are spell slots canonic in D&D lore? That's a good question. So, if you look, yes and no. That's the answer to this. So the answer to your are spell slots something that has sort of always existed in D&D? There's always been a limit to how much magic you can cast or how many spells you can cast in Dungeons and Dragons. Okay? And it's based off Vancian Magic or Jack Vance, the Dying Earth books. And so 5e has spell slots, as you know. If you look at something like Dungeons and Dragons 4e, for example, they use powers. And so you only have a certain number of encounter powers and daily powers And then you have at-will powers, which are kind of like a cantrip. You can use them as many times as you like. But with encounter powers and daily powers in Dungeons & Dragons 4e, a spellcaster would essentially have only a limited resource of them. They could only do them a certain number of times, and that was it. Usually, whatever you had, you could only do once. If it was an encounter power, you could only do it once during a battle. If it was a daily power, you could only use that power once a day. That was it. So that's a slightly different system to what you've got now. Okay? The great thing about it is that whatever spells you knew and whatever spells you prepared was reasonably easy to figure out because you just used cards. You used a card system. Okay, so that's your first thing. Now, if we go to something like Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, yes, there was known spells. Some spellcasters had to prepare their spells from their known list, but others could choose from any of the spells. It was called a spontaneous caster in 3.5. Spontaneous casters tended to be the sorcerer and I believe the cleric. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. But the thing is, you would still only have a certain number of spell slots, so you could only cast a certain number of level 1 spells, a certain number of level 2 spells, going up and up and up, depending on your character level. So it's a little bit different. It offered a bit more flexibility than Dungeons & Dragons 5e. 5e is a lot more restrictive than 3.5, but probably offers more options than Dungeons & Dragons 4e, although 4e, potentially, if you were running a lot of encounters in a given day, you could keep using your encounter powers. You wouldn't, as long as you didn't rely on your daily power for everything, you could probably get by. You could just keep going. So there wasn't necessarily the necessity to go and rest because you had at-will powers, which were quite like a cantrip, a 0-level spell you could use infinitely, and then you had encounter powers, and the number of at-will powers and encounter powers you had was quite large. You had a lot of options. Now, if you look at, I can't really comment quite so much on AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but yes, you had a certain number of spells of a certain level that you could cast. So spell slots were still a thing in AD&D or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, whether it's first ed edition or second ed edition. Then if we go back to something like basic Dungeons and Dragons, well, the thing was with basic Dungeons and Dragons, you only had a certain number of spells, but here's the thing. When you selected a spell, that's the spell you knew. So if you only get one level spell, okay, a level 1 spell, then you only had one spell you could cast, but you only get to select one spell anyway. So if you decided, okay, I have a choice between, as a wizard, magic missile, mage armor, something like sleep, well, I have to pick from those three, and that's the only spell I could cast, and I would only get to use it once if I was level 1 as a wizard, or a magic user as it was called. So I picked my magic missile. So I can cast a magic missile. That's the only spell I can cast, and then I have to go and take a nice long nap before I can use it again. That's how that system worked. There were no cantrips. So spell slots, spell known, and spell prepared were really folded into the same thing. It's a lot easier to understand, but a lot less options available, not quite as much flexibility. So Helmer, I hope that answers your question. That's a long answer, I'll tell you that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so Fred has just said yes, but I've answered in a lot of detail. We'll see how this goes. It's going to take me a while. So your question next, Hilma, is, so can a wizard cast a ritual spell as a ritual? Yes, they can. So one of the first things you'll notice, Dungeons & Dragons 5e, the player's handbook, if you're unsure as to why or how that works, if you go to the wizard and you have a look on page, where is it? Here we go. So page 114, there is a section near the bottom of page 114 for the wizard class, and it says ritual casting. And it says here, you can cast a wizard spell as a ritual if the spell has the ritual tag. So first off, when you select your spells, make sure you pick lots of ritual spells. Always a good thing for a wizard. You only get so many slots, spell slots, so you might as well utilize ritual casting. And you have the spell in your spell book, so you need to make sure it's a spell that you can access as a wizard. It needs to be written into your spell book, okay? And you do not need to have the spell prepared. So one of the great things about a wizard, unlike some of the other classes that do have ritual casting, is you do not need to prepare that spell. It is considered prepared automatically. So that's one of the things. If you pick up a ritual casting spell, do not prepare it. Not unless you think you're going to be using it in combat, which you probably will not be. Ritual tags usually only apply to utility spells. Things that you're going to be doing outside of combat, things that take a long time. Things that have a longer casting time than an action, a bonus action, or even a reaction. These are things that usually take a little bit longer than that. So you don't need to prepare them. All you need to do is make sure that you know the spell and it's in your spell book as a wizard. And if you do so, you take 10 minutes, make sure you're doing it outside of combat because it ain't going to work otherwise, and away you go. You've got lots of options available there. So that's that question answered. So yes, you can. Fighter does not have ritual casting unless they take it as a feat. Yes, there is a feat that allows you ritual casting, but you also, to take the ritual casting feats, you need to be a spell caster. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So yes, you would have to find some way of getting access to spells or spell casting, and you'd also have to make sure that you have the ritual caster feat if you want to do that, if you don't have that already built into your class. Okay, next, let's go down. Helma's got lots of questions here. I'm just going to highlight your question here so I do not... I see you got your next question is about the cleric. Good. And I just wanted to see who else is in the chat. Hello, Fred Hubber. How are you? Oh, no, Phil Kearney. How are you doing? Charles Butler. Charles Butler is a patron. Thank you for being here, Charles. You think I have consistently really good streams. I do 6 live streams a week. I've got a lot of practice and I've been doing it for years. So is it really a surprise? Really? Okay. All right. Hulma, your next question. Oh, I see. Okay. So cleric, wizard, and sorcerer can cast comprehend languages as a ritual. Yep. So one of the great things about... Now, remember, comprehend languages has to be on the list for the cleric, the wizard, or the sorcerer. But for those of you who are unaware, I'll take my glasses off again so I can actually read the book and point you in the right direction. If you're looking at your classes such as the cleric, which is... Where is this page here? Okay, here we go. Cleric. So cleric has a feature, an ability that they can use, and on page... 58, it also has ritual casting, okay? It reads differently to the wizard though. So a cleric's ritual casting is a slightly different kettle of fish. You can cast a cleric spell as a ritual if that spell has the ritual tag. Okay, so we understand this. You have the spell prepared. So the difference between a cleric using a ritual spell is that unlike the wizard, not only do you need to have that access to that spell, okay, it has to have the ritual tag, but you have to also prepare that spell, whereas a wizard does not have to prepare that spell. That's your difference, okay? And then the other one you were talking about was the sorcerer, and sorcerers... That's a different kettle of fish. The problem with a sorcerer, and I think a lot of people get very frustrated by this, is that a sorcerer is not a wizard. That should be obvious. But you do not get ritual casting. A sorcerer doesn't get ritual casting. Okay? If you have a look at the sorcerer, you'll find the section from pages 99. There's nothing there about ritual casting. Okay? All the way through to page 104. So if you want your sorcerer to be a ritual caster, you would have to take the ritual caster feat. Otherwise, you can't do it. But as a wizard or a cleric, you do have ritual casting, but they both work slightly differently. Okay? You do get other features though. Now, as for comprehend languages, again, you have to look at your lists. And I'll do this very quickly. Let's just go here. So I'm actually looking in the right place for you. Okay. So if the cleric is going to do comprehend languages has to be on the list for the cleric. And if you have a look, there's no comprehend languages for the cleric. They have Bane, Bless, Command, Create or Destroy Water, Cure Wounds, Detect Evil and Good, etc., etc., etc. But comprehend languages is not on the list for a cleric. So even if they are a ritual caster, they can't cast that spell as a ritual because they do not have access to it. If we go to the sorcerer and we look for comprehend languages is on the list for the sorcerer, but the sorcerer must cast it as anything but a ritual because they don't have ritual casting. You have to go get that ritual caster feed if you want to be able to do that. So they have access to the spell, but they're not a ritual caster. It's only the wizard, because the wizard, if you have a look at the wizard and their spell list, comprehend languages is on their list. It is a ritual tag, okay, spell, and it's a wizard's got ritual casting as a feature that they can perform. So really the wizard is the only one who can easily, out of the gate, without having to make adjustments, get access to this spell. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Yeah, if you have learned it. So yes, so that's another difference between a cleric and a wizard. A wizard just knows all of the spells on the list for the cleric. They have to prepare spells from their list. A wizard doesn't know all the spells on their list. Okay, they actually have to take that spell and put it into their spell book for them to know that spell. So they have to learn spells. So it takes it. There's a lot more work involved to get all this access to all the spells that you want. But they also have to prepare the spell as well, unless it's a ritual. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, Helmer, you got here, and a paladin can cast Find Steed as a ritual. So this is your question. Okay, so here's another problem for your paladin. If we have a look at the paladin, and we will open up the page to where it is so that I can actually talk from the book. That's going to probably be a bit easier for me. You're asking a lot of really good questions, by the way. So keep flying away with those questions. I'll get through them all, I'm sure. I need a video for helping my players to read the rules. We have 1 year playing and they still without knowing how to use their character. So I have a lot of very short videos, Helmer, on how to play, use the basic rules for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. There's a playlist that says how to play D&D 5e. And it has about 50 to 54 videos that go over all the rules, all the basic core rules. Okay? Maybe that's the way to do it, is just get them to go and watch those videos so that they know what's going on. But again, you're asking a lot from players to try to put, if they haven't tried pursuing it now, they're probably never going to. Okay. If you have a look at the paladin, you'll notice that the paladin does not have ritual casting as an option. There's no class feature that says you can actually cast a spell as a ritual. If that makes sense, cool. Now let's have a look at, so first off, you can't cast Find Steed as a ritual. Now if we go to the paladin and have a look at what they have in terms of spells that are on the list that they could access, the paladin has, okay, where is it? So level 2 spell, Find Steed. Find Steed. Now that's a level 2 spell, not a level 1 spell, but a level 2 spell. But it's on the list so they can have access to it. The paladin, I think, might be the only class that can use Find Steed, but I can't remember for sure. But in any case, let's have a look at Find Steed. Find Steed is on page, here we go, page 240, Find Steed. So Find Steed takes 10 minutes to cast. Now this is probably where you've got confused. It takes 10 minutes to cast, but it does not have the ritual tag. It's just got a very long casting time. So to cast Find Steed, you do not need to cast it as a ritual because it already takes 10 minutes to cast. Yeah? So therefore, the paladin does not need to have ritual casting because most of the spells they cast don't have the ritual tag anyway. And their spell list is very, very small. So that's the difference. Okay? Find Steed is probably one of the worst spells out there if you ask me. Just give them a horse and stick armor on them and be done with it. Anyway, that's me poking my my decisions and opinion in there. Yeah. So yes, so Find Steed does not have the ritual tag. Paladins are not ritual casters. And the Find Steed spell has a spell casting time of 10 minutes anyway. So it doesn't make any difference. You don't need to worry about doing that. Next, you like the stream? I'm glad, Helmer, you are finding it useful. I can see we have lots of questions. I'm going to find my way through here. Yeah. So no, it's all right. Keep asking your questions. It's all good. I started way back when the game was three fin, small pamphlets and everything. From there, got added a little at a time. Yeah, 40 years. They've added a lot. Hello, how's it going, Big Kid? Big Kid is a patron and also a moderator. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to highlight and just see how far down this list I have to work. Satori, hello, how are you? And we have Mary Shack. Hello, how's it going, Mary Shack? I feel like I should just call you Murray Shack. Yeah, no, it's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay, it's all cool. I'm going to keep working. So keep throwing your questions at me, and I'll keep answering them. That's why I run this live stream as a live stream. Or should I say, I run this topic as a live stream because it makes sense. Okay, so let's keep looking at what we've got here in terms of things I need to respond to. Okay, Big Kid's question. How do you handle counterspell? If you are casting a spell and get counterspelled, can you still counterspell and complete original spell? Okay, all right. So I see where you're coming from here. Okay, so a little confusing. I get it, but your answer is pretty simple. Yes, you can. You can counterspell a counterspell. But here's the problem with doing this, is that some game masters have very specific criteria that they set up, which is not necessarily tied directly into the rules in 5e, or certainly not the player's handbook. They tend to be optional things or guides, which would talk about like, what can I achieve? What can I do? What can I not do? Stuff like that. So let me just work over here. I'm going to just go back to this screen here, and let's give you a battle grid to sort of demonstrate for this situation. So let's imagine we have a spellcaster in this group. Here's our bandits. Here's our spellcaster. Here's our spellcaster in our parties group. And say, what happens is, our sorcerer or our wizard decides to cast Fireball and blow everybody up. But our enemy spellcaster notices that there's a fireball being cast, and our dungeon master or game master has allocated counterspell to their spellcaster. Well, if they can recognize that there's being a spell cast, they can try to counterspell it. So as long as the spell has not been cast at too high a level, so I only cast it at 3rd level, okay? I counterspell it, and of course it would be stopped. There's no dice roll, it's just going to happen. So yes, I can counterspell the sorcerer's fireball. Well, then I see my sorcerer notices that the enemy spellcaster is trying to counterspell my fireball. Now I did that as on my turn, okay, as part of my action, but counterspell is a reaction, right? Which is why the enemy spellcaster was able to use it in the first place. So that means the sorcerer can also try to counterspell the counterspell, which would probably be successful, which means that the fireball would still go off. Isn't that a ridiculous situation? It won't go back and forth forever because you can only ever have one reaction. So I can only, as a spellcaster, I can only cast counterspell once, okay? Because I only get one reaction per round. Same with the spellcaster here. So yeah, I can do that if I want to. It's certainly possible. For those of you who are looking at that and thinking that just seems like a giant pain in the butt, it's trying to duplicate the idea that wizards and spellcasters can get into spellcasting duels. And if you understand that that's the intention behind it, it's pretty easy to get your head around, right? Okay. So yes, big kid, you can counterspell. But do you think that they recognize that there is a spell being cast? They don't have to recognize that exactly what the spell is. They just need to recognize that there's a spell being cast. Yep. Okay. All right. Next, Charles, your question. Take it from me, from someone who dealt with it. After a year, they still don't know. They don't actually care. A video won't help. Yeah, that's another factor too. Is like Charles is quite right, and I did say that before. That sometimes players just don't care about that sort of thing. My advice to you is, when you have players like that, go find the simplest system you can. You know, Dungeons and Dragons 5e is not the simplest game out there. Go find a simpler system and get them to play that game, because they don't really care about the rules. That's the reality quite often, you know. And if they're already happy to just keep playing the game that they're playing right now, there's the hope that by osmosis and time that they might actually remember some of this stuff. It's always possible. Counterspell is one to adjudicate. It's not hard to adjudicate. You just got to decide how you're going to treat counterspell. And every game master likes to do things a little bit differently with counterspell. Counterspell is, frankly, and I love spellcasters, one of the most fucked up spells there is. I'm going to say it now. I love playing wizards. I really do like playing spellcasters. But counterspell it ruins the player's fun, and it ruins the game master's fun, because magic doesn't happen. We had to try to do this with Dispel Magic. We never use Dispel Magic now. Almost never do I use Dispel Magic to stop magic being cast. No, it's Counterspell, because Counterspell is more reliable than Dispel Magic was. Dispel Magic is hard to get to work. Okay? Counterspell, easy peasy. Like, the chance of success is it's very simple in comparison. Dispelling Magic to stop Fireball dropping on you, much harder. We used to do that in 3.5. We used to try to distract people who had concentration spells by hitting them with Magic Missile, or preparing a Magic Missile. If I see that spellcaster cast a spell, I'm going to hit them with Magic Missile, which means they would have to make a whole bunch of concentration checks. Otherwise, they would lose their spell, which is exactly what we wanted them to do. We don't use those kinds of mechanics, because what do you get? You got Shield and you got Counterspell. Shield's another bad one. Shield's been around a long time, but the shield in 5e is very, very powerful. Probably the strongest it's ever been. Okay, so Fred, what do you got here? Yep, that's right, Fred. Yep, Fred's got it right. Cool. Material can only be with very hard to detect case. I'm going to see the traitor. I can't see. Yeah, if you can't see the hand motions, you can't see the spellcaster, then your ability to interrupt it is going to be very difficult. If you can't hear the spellcaster casting spell, so if there's a spell that where you've managed to get rid of all the somatic components, the sorcerer can do this, subtle spell meta magic is one of those things where if you can't detect that they're casting a spell, then you can't counterspell it because you don't know that it's happening. So that's, I guess, what Fred Hubbard's saying. But really, the sorcerer is the only one who has access to meta magic anyway that allows you to do that sort of thing. So there should be a perception check. Well, not necessarily a perception check, but you need to be able to at least detect what's going on. Yep. Okay, big kid, what do you got here? I've always played in a game that said yes, but I had a bad DM and they did that a lot. So now I want to make it harder. I see. I get it. Yep. Look, big kid, run the game the way you feel like it needs to be run. Like that's it's always been my. I mean, I run the game the way I want to run it. You do it the way you want to run it, and I think everybody needs to do that. Yeah, if you really want to annoy a player character, counterspell healing word. That'll do it. Yeah, for sure. Healing word is a very low level spell, and counterspell is a very high level spell. That's the only hassle. You're burning through a lot of high level spells to get rid of healing word. But in healing word is usually, if you're smart, you're using it to get somebody back in the fight because they've got 0 hit points, right? Counterspell Revivify. Yes, you could counterspell Revivify if you wanted to. Absolutely. That's certainly possible. Again, as long as you can see that they're casting the spell, you can do so. Revivify, yes, that's true. Revivify tends to happen after the fight. Because Revivify takes a little bit of time to actually do, and, well, no, actually it doesn't actually. It's just a costly spell. So there's a lot of materials that are required. It's 300 gold pieces worth of diamond dust, isn't it? And yeah, they can't be dead for more than a minute, I believe, if I remember right. I send every new player Fred's videos. Thank you, I appreciate that. Great, awesome, love it. And I'm always happy when I have people sharing my stuff, so that I don't have to try to get it out there for people. It's always nice when that's that's happening. I love that. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Dear. Now, I have a question. I do actually have a question for you. My question is directed at Murray Shack. I think I'm right about this, but I could be wrong. Your patron name would be Brian Murray. Is that correct? Are you the same person? I can see the picture looks similar, but it would really be helpful if you could let me know. Because if you are a patron, and I thought you were, but I was like, the name doesn't quite ring a bell, and it doesn't quite line up with what I see on my Patreon list. But if that's you, Brian Murray, you let me know so that I can call you out. Okay? Yeah. It's a bit how to can't counterspell Revivify if the enemy's already dead. Hide for that reason. Okay, question. Satori's had to wait a long time. We finally got there. What are your thoughts on counterspell? As a DM, I'm afraid this is going to be a bit annoying. Yes, it is. Counterspell is a bit annoying. It is very annoying. This is one of the reasons why I do not like the spell. Not because I think we should take fun. That's me. Okay, I thought it was. Cool. So, Murray Shack is a patron. Glad to have you. It's always nice when I can actually pick people out of the chat. And yes, so Satori, your question, what are my thoughts? Frankly, I think counterspell should go. I've always seen people argue the point that, there's a reason why the monsters don't have counterspell if they're a spellcaster. It's so that we don't shit all over the player's fun. But it also craps all over the game master's fun, because there's only so many spells you can get off in a battle with a spellcaster. You maybe get 1 or 2 spells off and then you're done. And if you're having them counterspelled, then nothing happened. And it's not a big deal. Like often you'll have to unload with a spellcaster. Enemy spellcasters have to unload with the biggest, baddest spells they have. And if Counterspell can stop automatically any levels 1, 2, or level 3 spell, that's half the fight done. If the spell is cast at a higher level, like at level 4 or 5, there is a check made. But who cares? You can shut down level 1, 2, and 3. So, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it to use it for players. And then to give it to wind up using against the players, well, there's the other thing is like the players were hoping to get that spell to work. I think if anything, I would much prefer it to go back to the day where we had to rely on very, very specific circumstances where we tried to use Dispel Magic, or we had to use things like Magic Missile or other spells that did damage and ready those spells to try to stop somebody from casting a spell. Because one of the things that would also happen in older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, and 5e doesn't do this now, is that when a spellcaster cast a spell, even if it wasn't a concentration spell, even if it didn't sort of have a duration and it was instantaneous, if you tried to cast a spell and somebody could hit you and do damage, you lost the spell. Didn't matter whether it's a concentration spell or it was instantaneous. So what you could do is you could ready an action to cast something like Magic Missile at a spellcaster. I ready my action to cast Magic Missile at that spellcaster if I see them trying to cast a spell. And you could shut that down. And that's what we did as players. That was our solution. That was our counter spell, essentially. It was only a level 1 spell, though. And it didn't always work because there was a spell casting check you had to make for it to work. Even if you took damage, there was still a check that had to be made at the other end. But it wasn't automatic. That's the thing. The fact that Counterspell can automatically shut down level 1, level 2, and level 3 without any dice roll is the biggest issue for Counterspell. Because more than likely, you're going to shut down most stuff. Unless you're playing at high level, most of you are not going to be playing to level 20 or even past level 10. And so, yeah, Counterspell's like, why would you not take it? Next. So, Brian Murray, your question, how do you handle guidance at the table? I feel like it sometimes gets out of hand. Yes. Okay, so here's my view on guidance. Guidance can only last a certain amount of time. So if you have a look, I'll pull the spell up. They're trying to rectify the problem right now. Wizards of the Coast is trying to reword the guidance spell so that it doesn't cause quite so much strife for people. That is probably not going to solve the problem, but we'll get there. Hi, Steve C. How are you doing? I'll get to you. Don't worry. I'm working my way through this list. I'll be as quick as I can. So let's look at guidance. And I'll just open up the book to guidance first so that I can kind of point this out. And then I'll just read and you can see what I'm getting at, I guess. That's probably the easiest way. Today is going to be a Q&A day, I believe. I might not get too much demonstration done today. Anyway, so let's do guidance. Guidance. Sorry, people, I'm finding it. My brain is not moving fast enough. Guidance. Which page? Guidance. Here we go. Page 248 for guidance. Okay, so first off, guidance is an action. So that means that you have to cast it either out. You can cast it outside of combat. You can cast it in combat, but you're not going to get to do any kind of attack. So guidance usually doesn't get used in battle anyway. It's usually used outside of battle. So the fact that it's an action to cast, or 6 seconds, means almost nothing. It means almost nothing. Really? Yep. So that's your first problem, right? It's a touch, so you have to be close enough to be able to touch them. Okay? And it's concentration. So it lasts up to 1 minute, and you have to concentrate on it. So here's the thing that usually happens, I find, is that my players will try to figure out if the situation that's being used is going to allow guidance to work. And so if they have there's a person, one of the players is trying to climb a tree or up a cliff. We want to improve their chances of climbing the cliff. And so what they say is, I cast guidance on them. Okay, fine. So now they get a bonus. Now the bonus for guidance used to be only a +1. But in 5e, it's now a 4-sided dice roll. Guidance is a big deal. Like if you roll a 4-sided dice, you could get as high as a 4. That's a lot more than just a 1. It's not a small effect now. It's quite a bit significant. It's double what it used to be, because on average you get 2. Okay, now they have their D4 plus the D20 plus their modifier for climbing the athletics check, and up the hill, up the cliff they go, up the tree they go. I don't have a problem quite so much with that, because I would be expecting them to use things like a climber's kit and helping each other and getting advantage and stuff like that. Not so much of a big deal, right? So guidance, not a big deal. I think the biggest hassle you have is when people forget to say it when somebody tries to do something. Where like, okay, you want to climb this cliff? Cool. Make an athletics check. The person makes the athletics check, and then the person who has guidance remembers after everything has been resolved and they fail the check and say, oh, I've got guidance. Can I cast guidance on them? That's annoying. Really, really annoying, which is why they're trying to turn it into a reaction. I don't agree with this. The problem is that if you have guidance and you're not remembering to cast guidance in circumstances where it would be applicable, tough shit. Figure it out. Make sure you learn your spell and you remember if you have to put something in front of you. I find that annoying, and I'm sure you do too. And I'm sure other game masters finding it annoying when you've had somebody roll the dice, they've told you the number, you've told them whether it's going to succeed or not, and then somebody jumps in and says, oh, hang on, I've got guidance, can I cast guidance? And you say, well, hang on, you have to backtrack now. We now have to turn back the clock a bit to say you cast guidance. Or somebody says, look, anytime anybody tries to make an ability check or a skill check, I'm going to cast guidance. And you're like, oh, God, really? Is it going to be like that? There are certain circumstances where it doesn't make sense, right? Because, well, what if you have to make more than one check? Guidance only applies to one dice roll. So what if you're doing something over a period of time? Maybe your task is you have to climb a 200-foot cliff in this case. And the Game Master's determined that 2 dice rolls will be required. Well, it's fine for the first dice roll, but the second dice roll, why is guidance applicable? Because they can't touch them. They're 100 feet up. So there are certain circumstances when you're trying to do something over time, it doesn't make sense. Another example of guidance being used where it just doesn't make sense and it's quite annoying is that if you're trying to do something in a social situation and you ask for a deception check, you know what I'm talking about. The player's trying to negotiate with an NPC, and somebody has to make a perception, a persuasion check, or a deception check, or an intimidation check. And the person who's got guidance says, "Oh, I would like to cast guidance on them so they can do a better job at that." So they get a D4, and you say the problem is the NPC can see you casting magic on them. If they can see you casting magic on them, won't they think that there's something up with the conversation and the dialogue taking place between that player character and the NPC? It does. It's a complete break of break of the game in terms of the metagame aspect of it. They know you just cast a spell on your buddy. What is that magic actually doing? Would I not feel quite hostile that somebody's done that in front of me in an attempt to sway me in some way? Would that not then change my response to you? And this is where your biggest problem happens with guidance, right? Is guidance being used in a social interaction where a dice roll for persuasion, deception, or intimidation takes place. And the worst one is going to be deception. The next worst one is intimidation. And the least problematic one is persuasion. But the persuasion one is still a problem. So I don't like people using guidance in those situations, and I won't allow them to do so, because I say, well, the problem is if you do that, I simply increase the DC of the check because they know you are trying to mess with them. You're doing something, some sort of subterfuge, or in some cases, instead of there being a dice roll, it's automatically going to fail. That hostile individual who could have been negotiated with or deceived is just going to attack you. There is no discussion anymore. So I totally get where you're coming from with this, Murray, because Brian Murray, because I've had it in my game. I know what you're saying. So guidance really only works in certain circumstances. I would prefer them to take guidance back to what it used to be, which was a +1, and it probably best to stipulate that it cannot be used for social interactions, because the problem is, unless you cast guidance on the individual and you maintain it for a minute and then you go into your social interaction, you can't be doing it in the middle of your social interaction. It has to be happening behind closed doors. Otherwise, it doesn't work. That's how I rule it, and I know most people feel the same way. Okay, let's keep going. Let's counterspell the counterspell on my counterspell to your counterspell to my ally's counterspell. Well, he can only counterspell, like I said, so many times. Is it normal for me to see my players using counterspell to an enemy's counterspell? Okay, it's normal for me see my players use counterspell to my enemy's counterspell. Well, I'm not surprised, because they've probably seen what Jeremy Crawford said about counterspell. This is one of the reasons why I dislike the counterspell. That spell is just dynamite. It's just a big, huge pain. Okay, right, Charles. How do you handle a spell like Augury? Page 215. Thank you for the page number, which is basically asking, hey DM, will this thing work without being overly metagamey? It is the worst spell under the sun. It is absolutely one of the worst things out there. Satori, hopefully you're still here. I will get to your question. So Charles, can I just say, I don't think there is a solution to that one. Augury has always been a problem. I don't remember it ever not being a problem when I was playing 3.5. I was quite happy to find that Augury just did not exist in 4E. Not in the same form that we were used to anyway. So I was like, oh, thank God for that. Let's have a look here at the spell here, and I'll go over it quickly, and then we'll hopefully get to the next question. Augury, page 215. Okay, 215. Here we go. Bottom of 215. Second level spell. It's a minute to cast it. It's a ritual, so if you're a ritual caster, you can cast this thing in 10 minutes and pull it off, which you probably would do. You probably wouldn't be doing it any other time, since it's a minute. It's not a combat spell. As long as you are a ritual caster. And then you've got some material components. So look, it's such a general spell in terms of how it works, and the DM chooses from the following possible omens. That's it. Like, that's all you can do. It's trying to give you enough guidance so you're not getting too metagamey about things. But people often ask you questions that you can't really answer because you don't know the answer to them. This is where I find Augury is a problem. By casting a gem inlaid sticks, rolling dragon bones, and laying out ornate cards, and employing some other divine tool, you receive an omen from an otherworldly entity about the results of a specific course of action that you plan to take within the next 30 minutes. The DM chooses from the following possible outcomes, or following omens. Here's the problem. What happens if the players ask you a question and there's not necessarily a good or bad outcome? There's just an outcome. How do you then respond? Well, there's an option for good and bad. But what if you don't actually know what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes? Because the players, they've said, we're going to do this, but like, there's not really much that's going to take place. I almost find the spell to be just almost a complete waste of your time to cast it. So, yeah. I don't have a satisfactory answer for that one, Charles. It's one of those spells that is it is a metagamey spell, and it's a pain. It's just a pain. Okay. Steve. Hi, Mr. Willard. Okay. I'm actually Mr. Wheeler, but nice. Thanks. Just started the first episode of Second Size Wheel of Time. I'm not sure what that means. They handed magic totally different than the Terry Brooks wrote. Very disappointing. Well, Terry Brooks is a very different sort of writer compared to anything, really. Sorry, any form of fantasy magic shunned should have counterspell. No, I don't agree. I think the problem is you're dealing with a game, and the problem has always been that counterspell is just too strong. Um, so that's the biggest issue is counterspell is just too strong, and it's not just about resource management. I know, Steve, that you think that Dungeons and Dragons is about resource management. It can be about resource management, but there are spells that actually defeat resource management completely by the way they've structured and by the way they've written. Yeah. Thank you for the super chat, Charles. I really do appreciate it. Okay. Okay. I wouldn't waste it on a second or lower level spell. But you won't know if they're casting that spell. Here's the thing. Counterspell, it's not like you can tell what type of spell. This is another thing that players will do with counterspell, right? They say, I can can I see that they're casting a spell? What spell are they casting? They'll ask the game master this. This happened to me, right? And I'll say, you can tell that they're casting a spell, but you don't know what spell they're casting. What do you want to do? And they say, I want to cast counterspell, but I want to know what sort of spell they're casting first. And I'll say, no, no, I'm not doing that. Okay? Or you say, okay, the enemy casts a spell and a fireball descends on you. And they say, oh, but now that I know that it's a fireball, I want to cast counterspell. And you're like, seriously? Well, because they know that fireball is something they don't want to have happen. Fireball's a level 3 spell. They can automatically stop that, provided it hasn't been cast at a higher level, right? And so that's another problem with counterspell. Is the players will wait until the game master says, okay, this spellcaster is casting a spell and tells them what sort of spell it is, and that's when they'll say, I cast counterspell. Happens every single time. Every single time. That is a bad spell when a spell operates that way. It's not good. Okay? It is nothing to do, and there are plenty of systems out there that do not have counterspell systems, and they are perfectly fine, and they do have resource management, and sometimes they don't have resource management. So yeah, we're going to disagree on that one, Steve. Do you hold to using spell components like diamond for revivify? Yes, I always insist that the players must have the spell components. If it stipulates the monetary value, then they need to have the spell components. If it doesn't have a monetary value, then they can use a spell focus. If they don't have a spell focus and they have a component pouch, the component pouch has whatever they need. That's all I do. It's only with something like Revivify that states you need to have 300 gold pieces worth of diamond dust. And it's going to get expended. Once you cast that spell, you lose all that diamond dust. It's gone. Yeah, so Steve, I do agree that if you're going to have counterspell, it should be a roll-off for even a level 1, 2, or 3 spell, for sure. Yeah, I would say I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm very, very tired. Last night was rough at work. It was really bad. I'm still battling stuff as it is. Um, you run Thaumaturgy as a reaction. Let me now, Satori. Your question is up next, and if you're still here, I'm going to answer it. But I'm going to go to the super chat because Charles has thrown me a super chat, and let me just respond to his super chat. Okay. Thank you for answering our question. Greatly appreciate by everyone, I'm sure. Hey, no problems. All good. So let me go back to Satori's question, and I'm getting there. So how do you push your players to pick or use different kinds of spells? I feel like every spellcaster always picks the same spells. How often do you grant your players new spells? So here's the thing. I don't push my players to pick or use different types of spells. One, because it's actually quite difficult for them to do that. The way the game is structured, the game is not structured to allow them to do that sort of thing. So first off, as a game master, I don't push or insist that they try to use different types of spells. There are certain spells that are just better at doing things than others. That's just the reality. If you're a wizard, look, even if you are a player who doesn't want to give your wizard fireball, every person in the group is probably going to apply pressure for that player who's playing a wizard to take fireball when they have access to it, when they can cast a 3rd level spell. So even if they don't want to have it, now they don't have to listen to the group, but peer pressure is stronger than anything else. And unfortunately, peer pressure is also going to affect your game. So that's something to consider, right? Then the next thing I would say with regard to using different kinds of spells is you don't get that many spells. Like when you get spells, a wizard gets, every time they go up in 5e, they get 2 more spells they can add to their spell book. With a cleric, that's not really a factor, okay? But in terms of, it's about whether they're going to prepare these spells or not. They don't really know which spells they're going to need. And this is one of the things that in the past we really had to gauge which spell is most likely going to be useful. There are a lot of situational spells out there, no matter what class you're playing. So when you select your spells, you have to look at the one that is going to probably come up the most. If you want them to use different spells, stop using Vancian magic. Stop insisting on them preparing spells. If you want people to actually use different spells and a wider variety of spells, don't insist that a wizard has to prepare a certain select number of spells from their spell book. Just say you can select any of the spells as long as you have a spell slot for it from your spell book. Any of the ones in your spell book. Okay? Same with a cleric. You've got a level 1 spell and a level 2 spell, or 2 level 1 spells and a level 2 spell. Great. You know all the spells on your that are from for level 1 and level 2, because you don't have to actually learn those spells. You have to prepare them. Forget about the prepare side. Get rid of preparing spells. If you stop preparing spells in your game, your spellcasters will use different spells. It's just a natural progression. Okay? I highly recommend taking away some of the bullshit that has permeated the game for a long time. We had known spells, and then you could cast a certain number. When I look at basic D&D, in many respects it was so much simpler. If you have one spell, that's the only spell you could cast. Super simple. If you want to give them more variety, they only can cast one spell, but let's just say they can pick from any of those level 1 spells. That's it. It's such a simple fix. Now, when I grant players new spells, so I try to, if there's a wizard in the group, I try to drop scrolls and spell books. With a lot of the classes, you'll find the biggest issue, I think, is the sorcerer has known spells, a very limited list of known spells. Then they have to prepare the spell, and then they have spell slots. It's a giant pain in the ass. Get rid of some of those mechanics, and you'll make life so much easier for yourself. But yeah, I'm certainly open to wizards learning new spells. Sorcerers don't really work that way, but you could do it that way if you wanted to. Clerics, it's not really necessary. Just get rid of the prepared spell side of things, and you solve a lot of your stuff. Yeah, but remember, only wizards have spell books that work that way. Yep. It doesn't really work for a cleric. It doesn't really work for a bard. It doesn't really work for your your sorcerer, because they work very differently. They don't have spell books. It's only the wizard that really could work that way. Indeed, I feel I'm a bit too greedy with spells. I'd like that. Thanks. Okay. All right. Okay. Next. All right. So you give them 30 seconds to make a decision. I have a group initiative system, so that works pretty well for me. Charles, I enjoy with the wizard in my group who want to know what spells the corpse had in there. Yeah. Finding spell books is always fun for wizards. And it takes time, it takes money to actually get them into their book, so yeah. Yeah. Brian Murray, yeah, I agree. I think reaction for guidance is a bad idea. Um, Yeah, and going back to your skill to learn new spells is always a nice thing. But really, again, it only really works with a wizard unless you change the way that I mean, even a warlock. You think about a warlock. A warlock's even more restricted. So yeah. Hi Milton, how are you doing? Um, what you should do is watch the NPC for about a day and find out where their family lives and make the negation. That's funny. Good one. Milton the gangster. Yeah, 6 seconds. Yeah, can you just wait 6 seconds before you decide to negotiate with that NPC so that I can actually I can cast guidance? I appreciate that. Thank you very much. um, Milton, that's quite funny. Dear. Um, in some social interactions, people will swing swords when they see somatic and verbal component gestures. Yeah, that's an offensive gesture there. Yeah, that requires dealing with. My youngest daughter wants to play a diviner. She's a Harry Potter fan. Well, cool. Um, you're still waiting for her to roll up her character. You might need to help her with that one. Uh, a magic 8 ball that actually works with yes, no, but maybe, yeah, the magic 8 ball might work for sure. Absolutely. Oh my, there are so many. I'm going to just whip through here. I might not read off everybody's comment. I'm just going to read through them very quickly and find a question because this is actually, I am falling behind a lot. So let me go a bit quicker. Yes. Yes. We can always disagree on something. Life will not end. Okay. Join the show. Okay, good. So Tori, I hopefully your question was answered satisfactory. I know it's a tricky one. Uh, you used to send PCs out together, bat poo. Yeah, well, if that's what your game needs to be about, collecting bat poo, certainly it's entertaining for a little while. You use cranberry juice when I watch Fred some channel. They're always good. Well, I like cranberry juice, but then I like a juice full stop. Orange juice I drink a lot of orange juice, people. How do you go about inventing new spells in the game? I don't know. Maybe one. Okay, so here we go. Screaming toes. So look, when a player wants to make a new spell, just say okay, and I decide how long you want it to take. It doesn't matter how long it takes. You just decide. Just make a number. It doesn't really matter. Get them to decide what the spell is going to be called, what the effect is going to be called, and then once they've done that, we'll get them to write it down and have a look at it, and then decide what needs to change. The name of the spell is not the problem because whatever the name they give it, like it's not really that important. They can call it whatever the heck they like. The mechanics behind it, well, then you adjust it. because if they want it to be a level 1 spell, but it does 8d6 fire damage, well, it's just them trying to make a really powerful low-level fireball, isn't it? And that's being a bit of a dick. So don't let them have that. Just trim it down, But there's no reason why they couldn't have a small fireball that covers, say, 4 squares, yeah, and it only does 2 6-sided dice worth of fire damage, and it's a level 1 spell. Kaboom! Little fireball, bang, and we call it, I don't know, Bob's Fireball, whatever you want to call it. Like, doesn't have to be any specific game mechanics for inventing new spells. You just need to get them to decide what the name of it is, what it does, and then add in the other stuff. What effect, what target. I think at some point we'll have to do some live streaming as part of the Game Master preparation on how to create your own spells. I think that might be the way we'll go at some point. Inventing spells used to be a common thing until we got this big list of spells in 2nd edition plus the Unearthed Arcana book. Yeah, I mean, they've added so many spells. I mean, what spell is there left to make? That's another factor, right? You got a world setting coming out, at least 64 new spells, but will they really be that different? That's the question, eh? I mean, Firebolt could be just Cold Bolt, or it could be Acid Bolt if you wanted. You just can call it something else. There doesn't have to be a lot of really big changes to things. Celtic spells, Hindu-inspired spells, okay. You want to post with Steve? Fred, do you create a short narrative for your players' spells, or do they get tripped out at times? Now, so let me understand what you're trying to say here. Do you create a short narrative for your players' spells, or do they get tripped out? So I think what you mean is the player is playing a wizard and they cast Fireball. Here's my example. Okay, do I describe what happens with their Fireball? That's what you're saying, right? Well, no, I don't. But I describe when my monsters or my NPCs are casting a Fireball, I will describe that. I'm not doing the player's job. That's up to them. If they want to describe how their magic works in the game, they can do that. I have other things to do. If they don't want to do that and they just want to just do the mechanical side of it, fine. But my monsters and my NPCs that can cast magic, I'll describe their magic to them, certainly. And yes, I will do a short narrative for it. But it is pretty short, and I still describe it. I get very annoyed when players say, please make a whatever saving throw. And I say, what are you actually doing? Oh, I'm casting a spell. And I say, fine, you're casting a spell. What spell are you casting? Oh, I'm casting Firebolt. Oh, I'm casting Mind Sliver. I'm like, so at least tell me the name of the spell you're casting and what it's actually, at the very least tell me what spell you're casting. If you're not going to describe it to me, at least tell me what spell it is. This is very annoying as a game master. I've discovered in my group, do it quite a lot, and I have to keep reminding them, you need to tell me what bloody spell you're casting. But yes, my monsters and my NPCs do describe their magic. We were 10 when we started this. That's how we did it. Yeah, we cast one spell, cast another. Yeah, exactly. You're in early development. You have Discord, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube channels, talking to attorneys a month about. Okay, all right. Mordenkainen versus Elminster. Who wins? Frankly, I think neither would. I think they would probably. I think if anything, Elminster and Mordenkainen, if they were to sit down, they'd probably just have a beer or a cup of coffee and chat about all of their all the things that have been going on for them. I don't really think it would go any further than that. Then Mordenkainen would then probably try to insist that Elminster do something a particular way, and Elminster would just either tell him to stuff off, or say, sure, I'll do that, and then walk off and ignore him. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, let's get real. Mordenkainen is Gary Gygax's character, and Elminster is basically Ed Greenwood's character. And yeah, I don't think that they would necessarily get along that well over a long period of time. Our release will be done through Kickstarter in the States, India, Great Britain, Canada. Okay, all right, okay. Essentially, Gandalf. Ed said old Ed would stop Wardy and buy him an ale. True story. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is that either a coffee or an ale? That'd probably be it. Hey, no problems with being a fan of Greyhawk. Everybody has their own thing that they like, or maybe their own homebrew. Who knows? All right, so you're talking about Celtic spells now. Goldfish, cloning chambers. Okay. You guys are talking about a lot of stuff that's not really related here. Here we go. We've got a question now. Charles, oh my gosh, here we go. Here's our question. I'm running out of time. I'm getting there. Am I near the bottom? Yes, I am. I can see the bottom of the chat now. Cool. Question for Fred. For creating a spell, do you have the player do 90% of the legwork, maths and balancing, or do you take the input from the player? No, I let the player get the players to do as much of the work first. Once they've written out the spell and they created it, okay, then you adjust it. That's what you do after. So you need to get them to say, what level is the spell? What's the duration? What's the casting time? What materials are required? What does it do? Name the spell. Get them to do all of the hard work first. Then take it on board and then adjust it. That's my advice to you. That's normally what I do. Yeah. Next. Okay, that's okay. So you're talking about your monster book or campaign book here. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, whatever changes you make, you can explain it to your player why you would make the adjustment to the spell. But I always, look, if players want to make something, you need to let them make it. And if it's too much, then adjust it. That's real simple. Yeah, well, again, like I said, when it comes to describing the narratively a magical effect, I only do that for my monsters and my NPCs. I don't do it for the player character's magic. I always leave that to the players to do. That's their job, not my job. If they don't want to do that, so be it. But I'm not going to take it on board to do that for them. I am role playing and showing them and role modeling how it would be good for them to do it that way, but they don't have to do it that way. It's up to them. Who do you think is the best spellcaster in the game? All right, so Milton, I think frankly that the best spellcaster in the game has always been the wizard, and it still is the wizard in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. That being said, I think the bard is a Frankenstein spellcaster in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. A bard can cast so many different types of spells from different categories. It's actually quite silly. I am not a fan of the Frankenstein bard spellcaster. And for me, the bard is a bard that uses music, song, poetry, and their voice to affect the world. And I am not fond of them just being a hodgepodge of different spells. It's not great as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that's where my head is at with that one. Okay. What do you got here? I don't know about Fred, but I am voting for the wild magic sorcerer. But I like seeing the chaos the players bring down on the party. So if I have to pick the sorcerer, the wild magic sorcerer is my favourite. Not because it's the most powerful, because in its current form, it's kind of garbage. That wild magic surge table needs to be rolled on every time you cast a spell of level 1 or higher. Then you're really talking about a wild magic sorcerer. Otherwise, it's just crap. I've done this in my game. We've played it out, and for me, when I come back, I dislike what they did with the 5e bard. For me, I want the bard to be able to affect other people through song, inspiring words, things like that. And I would much prefer them to have features tied to that. The fact that a bard can heal somebody, that's not the problem for me. The problem is that they are just another glorified spellcaster who really is just a hodgepodge of the wizard and the cleric. And I have lots of people in my group who really like playing the bard. It's not that the bard isn't a strong character class. That's not the issue for me. I think one of the best redeeming features of the bard in 5e is inspiring words. Bardic inspiration is one of the better aspects that they have there. But, The Dungeon Master. You reckon the best spellcaster is the Dungeon Master? Okay. In my opinion, sorcerers are the best. They get a really charismatic character. They can cast spells, okay. Sometimes not great, but sometimes, yeah. So for me, Milton, I think the sorcerer has got some problems. And I'm not necessarily sure how to solve a lot of those problems yet. But I do know that metamagic is part of the problem. Metamagic is restricted now to only being used by a sorcerer, whereas metamagic used to be something that we'd use in terms of feats. You'd have to get the feats, the metamagic feats, to be able to get access to metamagic. And the sorcerer doesn't really feel like a sorcerer. A sorcerer still feels like a more restricted wizard with a few extra bonus things called sorcery points. And again, I'm not a huge fan, but the wild magic sorcerer is definitely, in my opinion, one of the better ones, as long as you get to use the wild magic surge table more often. Yes, thank you, Fred. That's what I've been saying for a while about the wild magic sorcerer, but I felt like I was alone in the opinion. No, you're not alone in my... Look, we played it for a year and a half this way. We played it, every time we used a sorcerer, cast a spell of level 1 or higher, we were discussing whether we would include cantrips. In the end, we decided to exclude cantrips. We would only include, it had to be a level 1 or up higher. There was no dice roll to determine whether you used the table. You simply had to use the table. And it would swing against us. It would swing in our favour. It would go all over the place. But what was really great about it is it was so funny. And it was so interesting. It actually made the campaign so much better. It's not like we had a winning card every time by rolling on that wild magic surge table. Sometimes I wound up as a pot plant or various other things, completely out of the fight for a long time, and people would just be laughing, or suddenly we were all about to die, and then a unicorn would show up, and we're like, oh God, we really needed that to happen. We really needed that right then and there. I ran a Wild Mage in 2nd Ed edition, rolled every time for the surge. Yes, Steve, absolutely. I am all for it, I think. And that's one of the things you'll find is if I ever do that's not true. When I do the Sorcerer, when I remaster the Sorcerer for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, I will make the Wild Magic Surge table intrinsic to the Sorcerer class. I do not think it makes sense to actually remove it. Sorcerers aren't as precise with their magic. They feel magic. They don't learn magic. Okay? So, and also too, the Vancian magic thing always annoyed me a lot too. So yeah. Persuasion is not charm. Charm is not dominate. All right. I'm not sure what you're trying to communicate there, but I thanks for that. All right. Let me end this poll because I have to go to work. This is my last day at work. Today, I suspect, is going to be brutal. And I am hoping that if I am not completely screwed over by today, tomorrow you will see me early going over the Rogue and hopefully doing the final rundown of my remastered Rogue, which I will put up onto Patreon as the first draft. Everything is first draft on Patreon, people, unless it's a second draft. But right now, it'll be a first draft. So as long as I don't get worn out tonight, that's what you can expect. I do apologize for those of you who were hoping to get some demonstration. I had intended to do that, but there were a lot of questions, and I tried to get through those questions as best I could. I forget where it's from, but I do want to try out the Divine Blood Sorcerer. No problems. What do I do for a living, Steve? I work for Goodwood Park Health Group. I am a mental health support worker / rehabilitation coach or rehabilitation coach. So I work with people who have mental illness issues, drug and alcohol problems, and also have a lot of behavioral problems as well. There might, in some cases, be some fairly significant intellectual issues going on as well. Sometimes physical issues as well. And I'm in a locked site. So my workplace is essentially one step down from a high security locked hospital ward for mental illness. Really, that's what we do. And the site that I work at originally was set up primarily for rehabilitating people who had brain injuries from accidents or from illnesses and things like that. And I'm hoping to be able to get out of that line of work in the next year and a half, if I can, because it will kill me. It will. They expect way too much nowadays. In fact, they've always expected too much, and I need to get out before I wind up a patient there. So that's where my head is at right now. Anyway, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody. I do appreciate it. I want to thank all my patrons. Yeah, look, it's really nice when I get lots of questions like this, even when they're tough questions. And if I can answer them and give you something that's useful, great. That's wonderful. Cool. And hopefully it'll get you moving and doing whatever you need to do. Thank you for responding to the poll. If those of you who did, if you've just been watching and listening and not in the chat, that's all cool. Thank you very much for being here. Big, huge thank you to Steve C., Milton, Charles, Fred Hubber, Big Kid, who is a patron and a moderator. Thank you for being here. Charles is also a patron. And yeah, it's always nice when I have the patrons here. Shiner81, thank you for being here. Who else have we got here? Satori has been hanging out with us. Helmer has been asking some very, very tough questions, and I think I got through most of them pretty. It was a little bit hard at times, but I got there. They took a little while to get them done, but we got them sorted out. And yeah, if I've missed anybody here, I do apologise. I was not. Oh, that's right, Brian Murray, also patron. Thank you for being here and asking your questions today. It's been great. So, look. Wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I forgot about